Namaste and welcome to a special interview today with Dr. Raja Bhaumik, who is not just a practicing doctor but is now officially a historian with his book, Journey to India's Freedom, an Untold Story. So this book has been generating a lot of waves because of the content. It has kind of a neutral approach and it talks about many things about India's freedom struggle which has not been covered so far by many other historians. So let us welcome Dr. Raja Bhaumik. Namaste ji.
Namaste. Thank you. Thanks for the welcome. Thanks for your kind words.
Right. So, Journey to India's Freedom, and you've captioned it an untold story. It's from 1858 to 1948. So, naturally, I think the thing that is curious is everybody knows about India's freedom struggle story, but you're saying there's an untold story behind it. So, what is your rationale behind titling your book an untold story?
Namaste to everyone. The reason why I titled this particular book an untold story is that there are many things that we do not know, in spite of the fact that we feel that we know a lot about our freedom movement. And the advantage of this has been taken up by many people in trying to mislead us about what exactly happened during the Indian freedom struggle.
Right.
It was on account of this particular misleading comments that when I started finding out for myself what was the truth behind the entire story, I found that majority of the things I myself did not know.
Right.
So I felt that this must be a similar scenario amongst most of us.
Right.
Not only amongst most of us, but even amongst our children and for people who are going to follow us.
Right.
So in order to spread the awareness, I thought it was the need of the hour for me, not only to educate myself, but also to the best of my ability to share it amongst each one of us.
Right. So essentially you've gone through, and as a practicing doctor, you're into diabetology, you're into internal medicine, you're into nephrology as well. But somehow you found time not to write just one volume, but there are actually 2 volumes of your book. So you certainly said there was a curiosity that, there's a lot of information that is being hidden. You want to get into it. So how did you actually get into this journey? And what was your path through it? Did you access some archives? Did you talk to some people? So how did you come up with actually 2 volumes of this book?
I did speak to some people, and I found that most of the things, including myself, we were unaware of.
Right.
And what I thought is that the entire thing has actually evolved over a period of time. It is not that just one fine day, a few group of people, they felt that that we should live in free India. Right. Now, so this process of evolution, I thought, had to be chronicled.
Right.
As a result of which, I have broken my entire book into 7 chapters.
Right.
And those 7 chapters have been divided across 2 volumes.
Right.
And each of these chapters, they are actually chronicled in such a way that each one is linked to the other.
Right.
So, because once you are able to connect the dots, it becomes that much easier for you to relate, at the same time also to remember.
Right.
So, it becomes that much more relevant for the people who are reading, and that much more useful for the people who actually need that information over a period of time.
Fair enough. So if we actually go through the mainstream history, so most of it, not just in India but across the world, talks about India's passive resistance, non-violence movement, and predominantly it is, we see a lot about Congress party taking the center stage when it comes to the independence movement. So I would like to understand from you that what is the origin of Congress party? Was it always a political movement, and was non-violence always the stand? So what actually happened over there?
So birth of the Indian National Congress, it was more of a social organization.
Right.
And initially the British decided, on the basis of the lessons that they learned through the first war of independence of 1857, that there needed to be a body wherein the Indians could come forward and air their opinion regarding the various initiatives which were taken up by the British. So it was like a safety valve.
It was a platform to present your issues, present your problems.
Yes. It was a platform wherein there could be exchange of opinion between the British civil servants and the Indian politicians, who in turn represented the opinion of the masses.
Right.
So it was then considered that by constituting such a body,
right,
various administrative measures could be either modified, could be rejected, depending upon the type of feedback that the British civil servants received from the Indian political leaders.
Right.
Most of these, unfortunately, most of the Indian political leaders who were brought onto the forum, they were very educated. They were either the lawyers or the journalists, but unfortunately, they never represented the masses.
Right.
So there was initially a sort of a disconnect
Right.
between the masses and their opinion being represented by the non-politicians.
Right.
And over a period of time, when, for example, certain politicians, they started coming into the picture, the British realized for themselves that it is not only a social body, but it is acquiring a political color.
I suppose this during Gokhaleji's time, or is it during Gandhiji's time? When did
It was partly during the time of Mr. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, because by that time already certain leaders, including Mr. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Mr. Dutt, who was also the mayor of Burdwan, who in their books very clearly mentioned how the Indians were being exploited economically by the British.
Right.
So slowly and slowly, people started identifying this organization as an organization where the anti-Indian approach of the Britishers were being put forward.
Like the un-British rule, they used to say that.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a sort of an outcry, and with the spread of the Western education, the Indian youth, they started realizing that freedom is the need of the hour. Because when they were going abroad, they were always being looked down upon as people who are coming from a country which is ruled by, for example, by a foreign power.
Right.
So they started realizing that it is important for us to strive for the freedom. And
Right.
they started reading the books of the various revolutionaries from Italy, from Russia,
Right.
and from other parts of the world. And they started thinking that ultimately it is independence which is going to be the final goal for the Indian National Congress.
So you're saying essentially Congress, though it started as a social entity, as a grievance resolution mechanism kind of a thing, your suggestion is some people actually became assertive, a little more assertive about their rights, taking a political stand and all.
Yes.
But eventually today in mainstream history, we see as if, the pre-independence Congress was majorly a non-violent body. So when you say there are people who were getting assertive and all, is it that some people were not just being non-violent, there were also some violent elements, or it was never like that?
See, initially the Indian National Congress was full of people who belonged to the category of moderates.
Right.
And they were mostly led by, represented by people like Mr. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Mr. Firoz Shah Mehta, and others.
Right.
These are the people, with due respect, these are the people who were actually in favor of the British rule.
Okay.
They were more in favor of a home rule movement, wherein, for example, the Indians were actually doled out certain incentives.
Right.
But these people, they had a great amount of faith in the British sense of justice and fairness.
Right.
They were of the opinion that British rule is for the good of India.
Okay.
Now, over a period of time, when this sort of various measures, like for example the Vernacular Press Act, or the Arms Act, or the Ilbert Bill. Ilbert Bill was a forerunner, because the Ilbert Bill was one of the first which told, or which put forward the proposition that even the white could be tried for any criminal act. But it was put down by the British simply because it was not to their liking.
Right.
So the fact that the Ilbert Bill was modified over a period of time, it actually led to a lot of recrimination amongst the Indians.
Right.
They for the first time now realize that the British rule is not for the good of Indians, but it is for the exploitation of the Indians.
Right.
This gave rise to a lot of apprehension amongst the Indians.
Right.
At the same point of time, the moderates' way of actually putting the things forward to the British was not yielding results.
Right.
The British now started taking these moderates for granted, and this can especially be seen during the first partition of Bengal, when so many petitions were given, so many protest marches were held, but at the end of it, Lord Curzon was very clear that Bengal had to be partitioned.
Correct.
He gave the reason that it was for administrative purposes, but it was basically to ensure that the Hindus are kept out of this particular movement. These are the various events which ultimately led the people to realize that the moderates are not going to help us. So therefore, that gave rise to what is called as assertive nationalists.
Right.
And one of the forerunners in this regard was Mr. Tilak,
Right.
Mr. Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and who from the time that he joined the Congress, he started advocating the fact that we should always, that the assertive nationalists had only one thing on their mind, that is the independence of India.
Right.
In course of time, Bal Gangadhar Tilak also was held by Sri Aurobindo Ghosh.
Right. So essentially now this is Congress eventually transforming from a grievance redressal till an assertive part, a nationalistic movement. So literally true to its sense, it was an Indian nationalistic Congress. But now the way students study in schools and all of that, we see that a lot of focus of Indian independence movement is attributed to Gandhiji, to Congress, to Nehruji, to Patilji. So are these, like the major players, or are there also other major players which don't really get that much of a limelight for Indian independence, that is?
The major reason for me to write this book was not only to bring everything under one roof, but also to emphasize the fact that it was also the revolutionaries who played a critical role. Ultimately, at the end of it, one must understand that it was the contribution of the revolutionaries as well as those who actually put forward the doctrine of non-violence. It was the sum total of their effort that brought us independence.
Right.
But unfortunately, in the history that we read, or even what our children are reading, I found out for myself that it was mostly the efforts of the non-violent people which was glorified.
Right.
But if you really go into the essence, you will see that it was because of the people because of the revolutionaries that we won the independence.
Right.
And the most important evidence of that is the fact that in 1956, when Mr. Clement Attlee visited India, and in an interview with the then governor of Bengal, he made it very clear that the effect of the Quit India movement was minimal, and primarily it was Netaji's INA which ultimately made the British to realize that their time was up.
Right.
But at the same time, it is not my aim is certainly not to bring is to attribute the entire thing to only the revolutionaries.
Right.
Everyone played their own role, but we must at the same time appreciate the selfless sacrifice that the revolutionaries made to ensure that at the end of the day, Mother India was not in chains.
Right. So when you were referring to revolutionaries, you mentioned about the Indian National Army of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose ji. Who are the other kinds of revolutionaries who you feel contributed a major role?
It started mostly from the early 1900s, and the pinnacle of this revolutionary activity was around the first partition of Bengal in 1905-1906. So at that time, this particular initiative of Lord Curzon to divide, or rather to partition Bengal into East and West Bengal,
Right.
it actually evoked a lot of protest, not only in Bengal but all over India. It was there seen in Maharashtra, it was there seen in the Madras province, in United Province. So therefore, it was a pan-India movement.
Right.
The focus of the movement was in Bengal.
Right.
But then, it was also heard. But then, this year the protests were also there from various parts of India.
Okay.
So that was the first time that the revolutionaries came into play. Prior to that, in 1905, the Surat session of the Congress party had undergone a division into the moderates and into the assertive nationalists.
Right.
So therefore, this was at that time, the assertive nationalists took up the cause of the partition of Bengal to
Right.
be their major, motivating factor.
Right.
So it started from then, and it continued all through
Right.
till, for example, 1947.
Right. So when you're saying moderates of Congress, we can kind of understand that Gandhiji, Nehruji may come under the moderates bracket. Where does Sardar Patelji fit in? Is he a moderate per se, or is he an assertive nationalist?
Most of them, they were all moderates.
Okay, even Patelji.
Yes.
Right. So within the Congress,
Including Mr. Jinnah.
Okay, he was also moderate, you're saying.
Yes, including Mr. Jinnah, who was very close to Dadabhai Nauroji.
Where did it actually change? Where Jinnah started getting assertive about a two-nation kind of a theory?
See, the two-nation theory, it never originated only with Mr. Jinnah.
Okay.
It started somewhere in 1885. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who founded the Aligarh Muslim University,
Right.
he made it very clear that Hindus and Muslims are two separate communities who can never live together.
Right.
So it started from there, and
Okay.
it continued into the 1930s when Allama Iqbal,
Yeah.
the person who wrote Sare Jahan Se Acha, he for the first time he told that British India could be divided, or in British India there could be one part that is Muslim British India, and the other part is Hindu British India.
Right.
That was the second time when, for example, the question of segregating Hindus and Muslims came. Only difference between Allama Iqbal and Mr. Jinnah was that Allama Iqbal never put forward his proposition of partition, unlike Mr. Jinnah, who made it very clear that it has to be two separate countries. And the difference between Mr. Jinnah and Mr. Gandhi was that Mr. Jinnah always wanted the partition to take place before the British left India,
Right.
while Mr. Gandhi wanted the British first to leave India, and then it will be decided amongst the Indians whether we need to go for a partition.
Oh, okay.
So that was an essential difference between the two. But both of them, both Mr. Gandhi as well as Mr. Jinnah, they favor the dominion, not independence.
Right.
We must understand what is the difference between a dominion and independent status.
Right.
Dominion status basically means that you are still under the British rule, but you have the right to enact certain laws,
Right.
which have to be ratified by the British Parliament and the Crown.
Right.
Unlike an independent status wherein you have the right to do everything which you feel is good for the people living within the confines of your rule.
Right.
At that time, the British rule will not apply to you if you are an independent country. Now, why Jinnah wanted a dominion status is because he felt that if in an independent India, it is very much possible that the Hindus may rule by the brute of force.
Right.
That the Hindus may rule just because they are the majority, overwhelming majority. So therefore, if it is an independent country, there will be no power or there will be no one to ensure that sense of justice.
Right.
So if in a dominion status, that will not be the case, because the British Crown will always be there to ensure that fairness is always followed. That was also one of the reasons why both Gandhi and Jinnah,
Right.
they opposed the independence, the idea of independence which was put forth by Netaji Subhash Bose and Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru.
So as a concluding question, so could we actually say that the start of the British rule, we know that it started through business. It started as a business, as a trading thing. Eventually, it became something like a colonial power kind of a thing. The conclusion of the British rule, do we think that majorly political interests played a much more significant role than social or civilizational aspects?
Yeah, political, it certainly played a role, because at the end of the World War II, it was very clear to the British that since they became a heavily indebted nation, it was not possible for them to maintain such a big administrative setup.
Right.
Number one. Number two, because of the role of the revolutionaries, which was represented by the Indian National Army, it was no longer possible for them to assure themselves of the allegiance of the British Indian Army.
Right.
So these two factors amongst many
Right.
were enough for the British to realize that their time in India is up for good.
Right.
Most importantly, what also did play a role was the Atlantic Charter, which was put forward by Mr. Roosevelt in 1941, wherein he made it very clear that America was against imperialism.
Right.
So by the time the World War II ended, America established itself as the dominating power in the world. So both America and to some extent even China,
Right.
they opposed the imperialistic attitude of the British. And that is one of the reasons which also contributed to the fact that they decided to leave India for good.
Right. Fair enough. So thank you so much, Dr. Raja Bhaumik.
My pleasure.
It's quite
My pleasure.
I think it's a good start for the series of interviews we're going to have.
My pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.
So you heard the discussion. Let's look forward for more discussions with Dr. Raja Bhaumik. We'll catch up again. Namaste and Jai Hind.